"Is this a joke of some kind?" asked the young officer, as she got out of the patrol car with a look that said, "I'm not going to listen to you." James Harris, who was 82 years old, stayed still on his motorcycle, his hands steady on the handlebars, and his calm eyes fixed on the horizon. The officers exchanged impatient glances and told him to get off the bike now, sir. Her voice was firm and she wore mirrored sunglasses. One hand was already resting on her holstered weapon. What they didn't know was that in just a few minutes, 50 soldiers led by a captain would arrive in Humvees, looking for whoever had dared to stop. James Harris has been getting up at 5 a.m. every day for the past 40 years. His small UC farm is about 10 miles outside of town. Yesterday, his 1978 John Deere tractor broke down, but Harris knows exactly which part it is. After 42 years of fixing machines, he can recognize every bolt and gear in the old rusty garage. Harris has a 1970 Harley-Davidson shovelhead that sounds like thunder when it starts up. He doesn't care what it looks like. The bike works and gets him where he needs to go. That's enough. At 82, he rides better than most men in their 20s. His reflexes are sharp from decades of military training, and he is always aware of his surroundings. This situational awareness never left him, but of course, no one sees that when they see an old man on an old bike. Life's irony is cruel. Those who have the most to teach are often the ones who look like they have nothing to say. To traffic. Light turned red at the entrance to town. Harris stopped the Harley next to the gas station where he usually filled up. The engine kept rumbling, a deep, steady sound that echoed between houses and stores. The low roar of the old 1970 Harley shovelhead stopped as soon as he saw flashing police lights in his rearview mirror. Ava Johnson walked with long, confident strides toward the bike. She wore mirrored sunglasses. 3 years in the city patrol and 28 years old. Is this a joke? She replied in a sarcastic way as she got out of the cruiser. "Sir, shut off that junk right now." Harris didn't move, stayed on the bike with his hands steady on the handlebars and his eyes serene and set on the horizon. The police exchanged irritated looks. "License and registration, and step off the motorcycle now," Johnson said in a forceful voice. He handed out the papers without hurrying, and they were all carefully collected in a worn-out brown leather wallet. One hand was already resting on her weapon. Johnson stared at the license with doubt. The officer. "Don't you think you're a little too elderly to be riding a motorcycle at 82? David Lopez went up with a smile and looked over the bike from top to bottom. "Man, this Harley is older than my dad," he said. "Sir, look at all the rust on the bike. Put your hands on it and stand with your feet apart." Johnson said the search wasn't needed, and they both knew it, but they did it anyway. A small crowd started to collect, and whispers filled the air. "Mr. Harris, where do you live? On a farm nearby, right off Highway 340 alone?" Johnson and Lopez looked at each other. Lopez said, another confused old man, "Do you have family? Anyone who takes care of you?" "I've been taking care of myself for 82 years, Johnson answered. "Yes, but don't you think it's dangerous to ride that motorcycle at your age? You could cause an accident and hurt someone." Harris didn't say anything. He just stared at the horizon with his hands behind his back. "Sir, I'm talking to you. I'm listening, so answer me. Don't you think it's irresponsible to ride an old bike like that at your age?" Lopez leaned in and whispered to Johnson, "I think he might be a little deaf too. Look at him just standing there, barely responding." Johnson raised her voice. "Mr. Harris, can you hear me? Do you understand what I'm saying?" The crowd grew, and so did the voices. "Poor old man, don't these cops have better things to do?" He does look kind of confused. Someone should call his family. The world split, as it always does, between compassion and judgment, especially when we don't know someone's story. Harris stayed quiet. He closed his eyes for a few seconds and took a deep breath. He had faced far worse situations than this in places far more dangerous, with consequences far more serious, but that was over 50 years ago. Now he was just another old man being humiliated in public. Across the street at the gas station, the owner Marcus stopped wiping down the fuel pump. He was a Gulf War veteran and 58 years old. He recognized James Harris right away. Harris had been getting gas at that station for 15 years. He was always pleasant, paid his bills on time, and said nice things to Marcus. Marcus saw the humiliation happen and felt his fury boil. He picked up the phone and called the Fort Carson military post nearby. "Hi, this is Marcus Williams. I need to talk to an officer on duty right away." Things were getting worse across the street. Officer Johnson was getting louder and louder, clearly annoyed by Harris's silence. "Sir, you're going to have to come with us to the station," Harris finally said in a calm, low voice. "What for? For bad behavior and not properly responding to a law enforcement officer?" She paused, then added, "Also, you need a medical evaluation before you even think about riding that motorcycle again." Harris looked at her with the same kind of patience he'd used to train hundreds of young soldiers. The same kind of patience he'd shown 18-year-old recruits who came to boot camp thinking they already knew everything about life. "Ava, let me try," said Lopez. "You see why we're worried, right? A man your age riding a bike like that might be dangerous for you and other cars. I've been riding for 65 years and never caused an accident, but now it's different. Your reflexes are slower, and your vision is worse." Harris could have said that his reflexes were tested 6 months ago during his annual medical checkup. He works out every day, and that his coordination is better than most younger men's. To prove anything to anyone on the phone with the base, Marcus told us what was going on. A local police officer was disrespecting a fellow veteran. James Harris is 82 years old, and I've known him for 15 years. He's an honest man who was humiliated in public just for riding his bike. The cop on the other end of the line abruptly altered his tone. "Did you say James Harris? Wait a second." Moment later, "Mr. Williams, keep an eye on the situation. We're sending a unit right away. Don't let them do anything to Colonel Harris until we get there." "Colonel, I can't tell you anything over the phone, but we'll be there in 15 minutes. The call was over. Marcus moved closer to the road, his heart racing. Colonel James had never told him what his military rank was. The situation across the street got even more ridiculous. Officer Johnson had now concluded that Harris ought to be taken in for a mental evaluation. "Mr. Harris, I need you to get in the car. We're heading to the hospital for an evaluation." "I'm not going." "What do you mean you're not going?" "This isn't a request. It's an order." Johnson was unsure of the law. There is no law that lets someone hold an old man just because he rides an ancient motorcycle. There was no law that said she had to have a psychological evaluation without a good reason, but now she was in too deep. People were filming, and backing down would entail admitting she made a mistake, behavior that puts his own safety at danger under elder protection law. Harris grinned for the first time. It was a faint, almost undetectable smile that came from realizing that someone had told a well-crafted falsehood. He had heard much more complicated lies from opponents who were considerably more deadly than this commander. "Johnson, can I ask you something? How long have you been in the service?" Johnson didn't like the way Mr. Harris spoke or the question he asked. "Get in the car now, or I'll have to use force." Marcus, who was still watching from across the street, felt something spark inside him. He admired whoever James Harris was. The man had incredible courage. The crowd felt the tension increase. They knew something big was about to happen, and they were right. Several cars started to come quickly down the road. James Harris had no idea, but help was on the way. Sound came first, a deep roar of motors. 12 Humvees sped around the bend, kicking up dust as they got closer. The vehicles stopped in a semicircle around the scene. 50 soldiers got out of the Humvees. The first one to do so was Captain George Farrell, 55, who had been in the Army. For 22 years, he walked straight up to James Harris, ignoring the local officers, and stopped 3 meters away to salute. Colonel Harris, the word colonel, hit the air like a grenade. Johnson and Lopez looked at each other in a panic. "Sir, we were told there was some sort of misunderstanding here." Farrell turned to the police for the first time, his gaze cutting like a blade who dared to halt. Colonel Harris Johnson moved to take back charge of Officer Johnson's local police. "We stopped this individual because his voice increased." All 50 soldiers took a synchronized stride forward, an instinctive show of solidarity for their commander. "Captain, I didn't realize he was military." This man served 3 tours in Vietnam, did intelligence work in the Gulf and Afghanistan, and personally trained hundreds of U.S. Army officers, including me. Right. He has 2 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts with 4 oak leaf clusters, and a Distinguished Service Cross. Colonel Harris is a living legend in the U.S. Armed Forces. Soldiers from all over the country came to train under him. Frel turned back to Johnson and said, "You disrespected a decorated war hero who gave 60 years of his life to serve your country." Lopez tried to step in and say, "We were just doing our job." Johnson's job is to protect and serve, not to humiliate an old man in public. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Cell phones were still recording, but now with respect instead of ridicule. The comments had completely changed. "Poor guy, that was awful. That officer really crossed the line," Johnson said as he stepped closer to Harris. "Sir Colonel Harris." "I'm sorry I didn't know, Officer Johnson. You should never judge someone by how they look. You don't know what battles they fought or what scars they carry inside." The lesson was not only for Johnson, but also for everyone who was watching and filming. Frel approached the colonel and asked if he needed an escort or transportation. "No, Captain, but thank you for coming, sir. We'll always be here." Harris walked back to his Harley, started the engine, and the 50 soldiers stood in formation to make a corridor of honor as he rode away. 1 hour later, at the local police station, Sheriff Smith was 52 years old and has been in office for 15 years, gets a call from the military post. "Sheriff Smith, Captain Frel, at Fort Carson, Captain. We need to discuss about what happened. This morning, I already know what happened since I talked to Officers Johnson and Lopez." Smith hesitated. He had known Ava Johnson for 5 years. "She was a fine officer and a committed captain, may I be honest?" he asked. "My officers made a mistake in judgment, not a crime." "Sheriff, let me be clear. Colonel Harris doesn't want retribution. He's not suing anyone. He doesn't want to ruin anyone's career. But we, as a military institution, cannot accept our veterans being treated this manner." Smith got the message. Political weight, institutional pressure, and ramifications that went far beyond a local precinct. "What do you suggest?" "A training program established with us. Your officers will come to our base to learn what it really means to serve our country. It will happen." "Captain, 1 week later at the municipal precinct, Sheriff, Smith gathered all the cops for an emergency briefing. Everyone's starting today. We're introducing a new protocol for field interactions, and all of you will be undergoing training." At the military base, Ava Johnson stood up in front of her nervous coworkers last week and said, "I made a big mistake. I disrespected a man who deserves our deepest admiration." She then went on to say, "I learned something more important than rules and procedures. I learned about human dignity." She looked around at her fellow officers and said, "Every person we stop on the street has a story. This is about treating everyone, especially the elderly, with basic respect, asking before assuming, and listening before judging." Days later, Officer Ava Johnson drove down Highway 340, her heart racing. The property was simple but well kept. A white-painted wooden house with a porch with rocking chairs, a yard full of bright flowers. A John Deere tractor was parked next to the barn. Harris was under the tractor in a grease-stained coverall working on the hydraulic system. His Harley was parked in the shade of a big tree. Johnson pulled up in the patrol vehicle, took a deep breath, and walked up to where Harris was working. Harris slid out from under the tractor and wiped his hands on an old rag. "Officer Johnson, can I help you, sir? Came to talk, if that's okay with you. Want some coffee?" "I just made a fresh pot inside the modest kitchen." Harris poured coffee into 2 blue ceramic mugs and sat down at an old wooden table, motioning for Johnson to sit across from him. "Officer, may I ask you a few questions?" "Of course. Why did you become a police officer?" Johnson wasn't expecting that. "I wanted to help people make a difference in the community." "How many accidents caused by elderly drivers have you responded to?" "Very few, actually. Most of the accidents I see are caused by younger drivers who are drunk, speeding, or texting."
Harris
smiled softly. "Then why did you think I was the problem?" Johnson couldn't answer because the reality was too clear and too painful. Harris got up and walked to the window, saw his cows grazing in the pasture. "Respect isn't earned just by a uniform or a rank," he said. "It's earned by how you treat others, no matter their age. She looked out the window at the motorcycle and realized that Harris had been riding it longer than she had been alive. That 1970 Harley-Davidson still made noise, still looked old and rusty, but it still worked. It still got Harris where he needed to go. That motorcycle still had roads to travel, and so did Colonel Harris. If you liked this story, so did all of us. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.